Hello again. Today I'd like to talk for a bit about Kent Hovind, who is a prominent creationist lecturer and debater. You see him online all the time debating people about things like evolution. And he has a tendency to go back time and again to the same talking points and pieces of information, even when people who know about these subjects have corrected him.
And it says in this book that all the animals will bring forth after their kind. Cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs. That's a fact, Dave. This book says they'll always bring forth after their kind. Would you be human? God said they always bring forth after their kind. Nothing has ever been disproven from that book. That book says 20 times in the first 7 chapters that the plants and animals bring forth after their kind. That's what it says. Okay, well, I believe by faith that this book I'm holding right here is true, and it says they will bring forth after their kind, after their kind, after their kind, after. God said they bring forth after their kind. Bacteria always produce bacteria.
So according to Kent Hovind, in Genesis, God designed all of the creatures he made so that each of them would continue to reproduce the same kind of creature in future generations. In other words, the idea of evolution, that organisms gradually change over time to the point that they diverge into separate species, is not approved of by the Bible. Kent didn't come up with this idea entirely on his own. It's based on a concept which we find in creation science circles, which is called baraminology, after 2 words found in Genesis: bara, meaning create, and min. Though min is often translated as kind, which is the word that Kent always uses, it could also be translated as species because it's used in the Bible to refer to different kinds of animals. But the Bible itself doesn't give us any reason to think that this is meant to be some sort of strictly biological classification. And despite what Kent says, the word min does not imply in any way that one kind of animal is defined by the fact that it always produces other animals of that same kind. Instead, this is just a general term of classification. So let's see how the word kind is used in the book of Genesis. The first use of the word min, or kind, occurs in verse 11 of Genesis chapter 1. And here it says in the Hebrew, Vayomer Elohim, Tadshe ha'aretz desha, Esev mazria zera, Eitz pri ose pri limino, Asher zar ovo al ha'aretz. In other words, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. So the key phrase here is Eitz pri ose pri limino, every kind of fruit tree that produces fruit. And in the next verse we have Vatotseha aretz desha, Esev mazria zera liminehu. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind. And then it goes on to say, Ve'etz osepri asher zar ovo liminehu. So, trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. So far what we've seen is that the word min is used to describe different kinds of plants, without saying anything in particular about their reproductive or genetic requirements, simply that God created all different kinds of trees and plants, for the use of people, of course, because that is the presumption of the book of Genesis. Then in verse 21, we go on to animals. So here we read, Vayivra Elohim et hataninim hagdolim, ve'et kol nefesh hachaya haromeset asher shotzu hamayim liminehem, ve'et kol of kanaf liminehu. In other words, God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. So again, all the kinds of animals that we see in our world were created at that time. And the same thing applies to verses 24 and 25. Now let's look at the other place in the Torah where the word mean is used extensively. Here, we're talking about which animals may or may not be eaten. This is Leviticus chapter 11. And again, it's being used in the sense of any kind of particular animal, as we can see, for example, in verse 14. Ve'et hada'a ve'et ha'aya leminehu, which here in the New Revised Standard Version is translated the red kite, any kind of black kite. So the word mean is not used here to describe every kind of bird. This is a list of birds, but cases in which there is more than one variety that they recognized as being distinct for whatever reason, such as color, size, whatever it might be. So if Kent were right that the word mean is meant to imply something about the biological characteristics of all organisms, why do we only see it being used to those organisms which have more than one variety in the classification system used by the ancient Israelites? So now that we've finished talking about kinds, let's have a look at the other part of Kent's original claim. He tells us not only that according to Genesis, every animal represents a particular biological kind, but that God has designed them so that they will, quote, bring forth after that kind. So in the end, Kent's claims about Genesis and the role it plays in our understanding of evolution really come down to nothing at all. By taking the approach of Kent Hovind and the creation science community, what we're doing in effect is impoverishing both biological science and the Bible. The science, because we're trying to force it to fit criteria that weren't intended to be applied to it, and the Bible, because it isn't a science book. And by using it to corroborate the things that we've learned from modern science and research, we're relegating it to the position of an inferior work of literature written by people who don't know so many of the things that we take for granted today, which of course is true, but makes it harder for us to appreciate it on its own terms. So that's all I have to say for today, and I hope to see you again.